started my usual night hike into the Angels National Forest, and the full moon gave off enough light to see the familiar trails. My worn hiking boots crunched on the loose dirt, and my light jacket kept the crisp air from cutting through me. I liked the quiet out here. It was a good escape from the noise of the city, a place where everything just felt simpler. Most nights, I was the only one on the trail, just me and whatever animals were moving around in the dark. It was a peaceful kind of solitude. I always started around 10, figuring that gave me enough time to get a good few miles in before heading back. Tonight, the moon was especially bright, making everything look like a black and white photo. The trees looked like giant cutouts against the lighter sky, and the deeper parts of the canyon were just dark, silent drops. I knew these trails well, knew every turn, every dip, every rise. It was like a second home, a place of comfort. Around midnight, I found my usual rock, the one that looked out over the dimly lit canyons toward Pasadena. I sat down, leaning back against the cool stone. The city lights were just a faint shimmer in the distance, swallowed up by the vastness of the mountains. It was easy to forget about everything out here, just clear my head and breathe. My eyes were tracing the outlines of the ridges when I noticed something odd. My shadow, cast long and clear by the moon trailing behind me, seemed to twitch. Just a little, a quick, jerky movement, almost like it was stretching. But I hadn't moved. I was just sitting there, completely still. I dismissed it, of course. My mind jumped to optical illusions, or maybe just how tired I was starting to feel. I'd been on my feet for a couple of hours, and sometimes your eyes played tricks on you in the dark. I stretched my legs out in front of me, hearing the faint pop in my knee. I probably just needed to get up and keep moving. No big deal. I pushed off the rock, pulling my jacket a little tighter around me. The air was getting colder the longer I sat still. I started walking again, making my way deeper into the trail. The silence was even more noticeable now. Usually, there was a cricket or two, maybe a rustle in the bushes from some small creature. But tonight, it was just quiet. My footsteps were the only sound, a steady rhythm against the stillness. I tried not to think about the shadow, tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild in the middle of nowhere. But a small part of me, a tiny, annoying voice, kept replaying that tiny twitch. It was unsettling. I walked for another hour, maybe a little more, the trail getting a bit rougher in places. I started to feel the familiar ache in my calves, the kind that meant I was getting a good workout. I figured I'd go another mile or so, then turn back. I stopped for a moment to adjust my backpack. The strap had been digging into my shoulder for the last 10 minutes, and I wanted to shift it. I pulled my arms out of the straps, letting the pack hang for a second before I lifted it back into position. That's when I saw it. My shadow on the dirt path, right in front of me, took a distinct step forward. Then another. I was frozen. My hands were still on my backpack, my feet planted firmly on the ground. I hadn't moved an inch. My breath hitched in my throat, and a cold dread started to seep into me, curling in my stomach. It wasn't an illusion, it was happening. My shadow, a dark, flat shape, was moving, on its own. I just stood there, staring down at it. It took another little shuffle, almost like it was impatient. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some explanation. Wind? No, there wasn't any. An animal? No, it was clearly my shadow, mimicking my form. Gravity? That was just dumb. It was impossible. Shadows didn't move on their own. I tried stomping my foot. It was a dumb reaction, I know, but I didn't know what else to do. I lifted my right boot and brought it down hard on the dirt. Thump. My shadow mimicked the motion, but it was off, distinctly out of sync. My foot had already landed, and then, a beat later, then its foot came down. It looked like a poorly dubbed movie, the sound and action just not matching up. My mouth felt dry. This wasn't some trick of the light or a tired mind. This was real. I could feel the cold radiating from it somehow. Not a physical cold, but a feeling of dread that seeped into my bones. My eyes were glued to it, watching for another independent movement. It stayed still for a moment, just a normal shadow now, but I knew what I had seen. I knew it had moved. I pulled my backpack straps tight against my shoulders, the weight feeling heavier than usual. I really didn't want to turn my back on it, but I also didn't want to stand there all night, staring at a rogue shadow. I glanced back at the path I just walked, then forward toward the trailhead. A new, unsettling urgency guided me. I picked up my pace, not quite running, but definitely moving faster than my usual comfortable stride. Every rustle in the trees, every snap of a twig, just made me quicken my steps. I needed to get out of here. Movement was what I needed. I told myself it was fine, that I was just tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me in the dark. It had to be. I kept moving, my boot crunching on the dirt, the only sound in the dead quiet of the night. I practically flew down the rest of the trail, the familiar path feeling alien under my speeding feet. My apartment in downtown, Los Angeles, felt miles away, a whole different world. But it was where I needed to be, away from the wide open spaces and the mocking moonlight. The next day, the harsh glare of the morning sun felt like a judgment. I pulled the blinds down, trying to block out every last bit of light that might cast a shadow. My apartment was suddenly a dark cave, a place where I could hide from the possibility of seeing it again. I needed to rationalize what I had seen. It was just a shadow, a basic optical phenomenon. It couldn't have moved on its own. It was impossible. I kept repeating that word in my head, impossible. I spent the whole day just pacing, going over every detail from the night before. The twitch, the step, the out-of-sync stomp. It all kept replaying, my mind snagging on the impossibility of it. My logical brain screamed for a scientific explanation, anything to calm the weird, anxious feeling that was growing in my stomach. Maybe I just needed to talk to someone who understood how the mind worked, someone who could tell me I was just overtired or had imagined things. Robert Hernandez popped into my head. He was an old college friend, a psychology professor at UCLA. Robert was probably the most grounded person I knew, always calm, always logical. If anyone could talk me down from this, it was him. Maybe he could explain it away as some strange psychological response to stress or something. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over his contact. How do you even bring something like this up without sounding completely insane? Hey, Robert, I said, trying to make my voice sound casual when he finally answered. It's James. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. James, he sounded surprised but friendly. No, not at all. What's up? It's been a while, man. Yeah, I know. Listen, I had a weird experience last night, and I was hoping, with your background, maybe you could offer some insight. I paused, trying to figure out the right words. It's kind of out there. Out there how? Robert asked, his voice even and calm. Well, I began, picking at a loose thread on my couch cushion. Have you ever heard of, really vivid dreams? Or maybe stress causing you to see things? Like things that aren't actually there, he chuckled softly. James, are you telling me you saw a unicorn on your night hike? I gave a weak laugh. No, nothing like that. It was just my shadow. I know how it sounds, but it looked like it was moving on its own, just for a second. Maybe more than a second. There was a pause on his end. Your shadow, he finally said, his tone a little more serious, less amused now. You mean like the dark shape projected by light? Yeah, that one, I confirmed, feeling a blush creep up my neck. This was exactly why I was worried. Okay, Robert said slowly. Well, from a psychological standpoint, strong emotional states, intense stress, fatigue, or even certain environmental factors can cause perceptual distortions. Your mind tries to make sense of incomplete information, especially in low light conditions. It could have been an optical illusion, compounded by being tired. So, it was just my brain messing with me, I asked, a tiny flicker of hope going off inside me. That's the most common explanation for anomalies like that, he said. The mind is powerful, James. It can really play tricks on you under the right circumstances. Sometimes your desire to leave a place or your focus on something new can create a sense of movement where there isn't any. He suggested it was a product of stress, or maybe just a vivid dream I was confusing with reality. Hearing him say it so calmly and logically made a small part of me feel better. It was just my mind. That had to be it. I thanked him, and we talked a bit more about general stuff before hanging up. I still kept the blinds pulled, just in case. Call it caution or lingering paranoia. But I figured it was better to be safe. That night, I made sure to avoid any direct moonlight. I kept all the lights on, bright and steady, illuminating every corner of my apartment. No shadows allowed. My living room felt like a stage under the harsh glow of the ceiling lamp, and I felt a little silly, but also a lot safer. I read for a while, flipping through a book on astrophysics, trying to immerse myself in something thoroughly normal and scientific, anything to purge the weirdness from my brain. Around 11, I decided to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. The apartment was still bright with the lamps on, but as I walked across the living room, heading for the kitchen doorway, I noticed something. The streetlights outside, even through the thin curtain on the window, cast a faint, almost invisible light into the room. It was barely there, just enough to outline the furniture in a soft, hazy glow. And then I saw it. A faint shadow, not mine, not quite connected. It separated from my body as I walked, stretching out a bit. A hazy, indistinct shape reaching towards the far corner of the room, almost like a tendril. It was ephemeral, barely there, like a wisp of smoke, but it was undeniably their asterisk. And then, just as quickly, it snapped back, melding into the faint, natural shadow my body cast. I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand still reaching for the kitchen light switch. A chill unlike any I'd ever felt went right through me. It wasn't the kind of chill you get from cold air. It was the kind you get when something fundamentally wrong happens, something that breaks all the rules. It was a cold dread that mirrored the one from the hiking trail. My mind started screaming now, a desperate, terrified sound. It wasn't my imagination. Robert's logical explanations, all the rationalizing I'd done, it all crumbled. This was real. Something genuinely abnormal was happening. My shadow, or asterisk shadow, was doing things it shouldn't. This wasn't stress, and it wasn't a vivid dream. This was something else entirely. I stood there for a long moment, my apartment suddenly feeling too big, too open, even with all the lights on. The silence pressed in on me, just like it had on the trail. I felt a desperate need to understand this. What was this thing? Why was it happening? I had to find an explanation, a solution. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers already flying across the keyboard, typing in frantic search queries. I started digging into old folklore, scientific anomalies, anything that might even remotely touch on animated shadows or weird light phenomena. I was going to find out what this was, even if it meant losing sleep, even if it meant venturing into things I didn't want to believe. A week passed in a blur of restless searching and very little sleep. My apartment, usually a place of calm, had become my fortress and my prison. Every curtain was drawn, every blind pulled shut, and every lamp was left on, day and night. I couldn't risk letting in any moonlight, not after what I had seen. The memory of that hazy, indistinct shadow stretching out from me, then snapping back into place, was burned into my mind. Robert's rational explanations felt like a distant, irrelevant echo now. This was real. My laptop became an extension of my hands, my fingers raw from typing, my eyes burning from the glow of the screen. I started every search with shadows moving independently, or animated shadows. The results were a mix of junk science, paranormal forums, and ancient texts. I waded through all of it, desperate for even a crumb of relevant information. Most of the stuff was easy to dismiss: ghost stories, cryptid sightings, and obvious hoaxes. But sometimes, buried deep in obscure digital archives or dusty academic papers, I found things that pricked at the edges of my sanity. I found references to something called umbra animata. It was Latin, meaning animated shadow. The phrase popped up in old occult texts, in forgotten philosophical treatises, and even in some obscure psychological case studies from the late 19th century. The claims were outlandish, of course. Figures like alchemists and mystics linking these shadows to dark magic, sentient entities, or extensions of personal despair. I tossed those aside. I wasn't looking for magic. I was looking for patterns, for connections, for anything that might shed some light on what was happening to me. Among the strange theories, a few consistent themes emerged. Many of the historical accounts of umbra animata mentioned intense emotional states like extreme grief, profound fear, or persistent madness as potential catalysts. Others spoke of exposure to specific celestial events, particularly lunar cycles. The full moon was mentioned often, always in hushed, almost reverent tones. I dismissed most of the sensationalism, trying to pull out the threads of what might be factual, or at least scientifically curious. It was difficult because my logical brain was still fighting me, screaming that this was all impossible. But I couldn't deny what I'd seen with my own eyes. My shadow had detached. It had moved, and it had felt cold like dread. The sleepless nights blurred into one long, anxious day. I existed on coffee and microwave meals, my apartment growing messier by the hour. My clothes piled up, dishes stacked in the sink, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My focus was singular: find an answer. I traced every mention of umbra animata, cross-referencing information, looking for patterns, for anything that didn't feel like pure fiction. The strongest common thread, the one that kept cropping up in various forms, was the idea of moonlight. Specifically, direct, unfiltered moonlight. It was linked repeatedly to the shadows becoming more active, more distinct, sometimes even described as viscous or thick. I remembered the full moon on my hike, how bright it had been, how it had turned everything into stark black and white. And then, the faint outline of the streetlights filtering through my curtain. It made a sickening kind of sense. My shadow was connected to the moon. I started experimenting carefully, meticulously. I'd crack open a sliver of a curtain, just enough to let a tiny pencil-thin line of moonlight into the room. I'd watch my shadow, barely there, but I could feel it. Subtle presence, a weight in the air. When the moonlight was completely blocked, the feeling lessened, almost vanished. When a sliver got in, it returned. My initial paranoia about light had been right, but it wasn't all light. It was moonlight. This realization, while terrifying, also brought a strange sort of clarity. If moonlight was the trigger, then avoiding it was key. But what if I couldn't avoid it forever? What if it happened again, somewhere I couldn't control the light? The thought made me feel dizzy. I was barely holding it together, sleep deprivation making my thoughts jumpy and fragmented. My phone rang sometimes, Robert checking in, or my mom, wondering why I hadn't called. I brushed them off, mumbled about a busy work week or being sick. I couldn't tell them. Not yet. Not until I understood. How could I even begin to explain that my shadow was trying to live its own life? They'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. One evening, after another full day of fruitless searching, I hit a wall. My brain felt like a dried-up sponge, incapable of soaking up any more information. The apartment felt suffocating, with all the lights on, the air stagnant. I needed to breathe, to feel something outside of this self-imposed bunker. My rational mind, the part that hadn't completely crumbled under the pressure, told me this was a bad idea. But the exhaustion, the frustration, the desperate need for a moment of quiet overruled it. I walked toward the sliding glass door that led to my small balcony in West Hollywood. I knew the moon was out, probably shining bright like it had on the trail. A part of me wanted to test it, to see just how strong this connection was, how far the shadow would go. It was a dumb impulse, fueled by a week of no sleep and growing dread. But I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed the handle of the sliding door, my fingers cool against the metal. With a slow push, I opened it, letting in the cool night air and, inevitably, the silver light of the full moon. I stepped out onto the small concrete slab, taking a deep breath. The city lights were a gentle hum in the distance, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of my apartment. I looked up, saw the bright disk of the moon hanging in the clear night sky, and let its light wash over me. It was immediate. The moment the moonlight touched me, a jolt went through me. My shadow, cast long on the concrete of the balcony, didn't just appear. It elongated, stretching out, pulling away from my feet as if trying to reach across the entire balcony. It didn't look like a normal shadow anymore. It was dark, almost too asterisk dark, and there was a strange, subtle pulse to it, like a thick, dark liquid under a membrane. It was a black, viscous entity, alive and squirming. My phone, which I'd been clutching, suddenly slid from my grasp. I hadn't moved my hand, hadn't loosened my grip, but it just dropped. It hit the concrete with a dull thud, sliding a small distance. My eyes were fixed on the shadow, which now seemed to be subtly shifting, almost vibrating on the ground. Then my arm moved. My right arm, the one that had just dropped my phone, began to lift. It wasn't me doing it. My mind screamed no, tried to fight it, but my muscles were responding to something else. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a strange, creeping sensation, like someone else was pulling on my tendons. I stared at my own hand, watching it rise, completely against my will. I fought back, pulling my arm down, my muscles straining. It was like wrestling with my own limb, a surreal struggle against an invisible opponent. The shadow seemed to strain, too, its black form seeming to ripple on the ground. I managed to pull my arm back down to my side, my shoulder aching from the effort. It was exhausting, but the shadow didn't give up. My hand twisted, fingers contorting. It felt like being pulled and stretched from the inside. My fingers curled into painful positions, bending backward in ways they shouldn't. A gasp escaped my lips, a sharp, choked sound. The pain was real, sharp, and piercing through my knuckles and wrist. It wasn't just moving my arm, it was actively harming me. The physical defiance of my own shadow filled me with a cold, desperate terror. This wasn't just a spooky phenomenon anymore. This was a direct, physical threat. It wanted control. It was trying to take me over, piece by piece. The thought made my stomach clench. I had to find a solution, and fast, before it got any stronger. My fingers, sore and stained with old coffee, flew across the keyboard. The fight on the balcony had jolted me worse than any horror movie ever could. Every muscle in my right arm still ached, a sharp reminder of the battle I just fought with myself. My phone, still lying on the balcony concrete where it had dropped, felt like a symbol of how quickly things had gone sideways. I'd left the sliding door open just a crack, letting in the cool night air that felt strangely clean compared to the stagnant fear in my apartment. I pushed away my laptop, rubbing my temples. My head throbbed. The The search queries I'd been using felt useless now. Umbra animata and animated shadows weren't cutting it. I needed something more specific, something that acknowledged the direct physical struggle I'd just experienced. I typed in shadow controlling body and hit enter. The results were still mostly folklore and urban legends, but buried among them, something new popped up. A small, obscure forum discussion. It was titled Anomalous Light Phenomena and Psychosomatic Effects. The thread wasn't very active, maybe a few posts a year, but one particular username caught my eye, Alina Grant. Her posts weren't wild theories or pleas for help. They were precise, almost academic, detailing experimental setups and theoretical explanations for unusual light interactions. She mentioned a private research facility in Santa Monica, a place dedicated to studying unconventional optical occurrences. A physicist. That's what I needed, not another psychologist. Robert had been kind, but his logical explanations hadn't helped with what was really happening. My gut told me this Alina Grant knew something, or at least how to approach something like this. I clicked on her profile, finding a link to what looked like a professional website for the facility. It wasn't flashy. It was plain, mostly text, describing their mission and contact information. There was a phone number, a direct line to the facility. I picked up my phone, my hand shaking slightly. It was late, past midnight, but I didn't care. I needed to talk to her. Immediately. The phone rang a few times before a crisp, professional voice answered. Santa Monica Research Facility. How can I help you? Hi, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is James. I saw a post online by an Alina Grant about anomalous light phenomena. I think I'm experiencing something related to it. There was a brief silence on the other end. Ms. Grant is a lead researcher here, the voice said. Are you looking to schedule a consultation? Yes, exactly, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. As soon as possible. It's urgent. I spent the next hour on the phone, trying to condense my unbelievable story into something coherent. I talked about the hike, the detached shadow, the growing detachment in my apartment, and finally, the struggle on the balcony. The person on the other end, who introduced herself as a scheduling assistant, didn't laugh or dismiss me. She typed quietly, occasionally asking for a specific detail, like the type of moonlight or the exact movements I'd experienced. They set up an appointment for the next afternoon. I arrived at the facility the next day, feeling like I hadn't slept in a week. My apartment had been a no-go zone for any kind of rest after the balcony incident. The Santa Monica facility was a low, unassuming building, blending in with the other office parks and clinics. Not at all what I'd pictured for a place investigating unconventional optical occurrences. No flashing lights or secret government agents. Just a calm, modern lobby with a few comfortable chairs. A woman in a lab coat, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, stepped out from a door marked research. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that sized me up as I approached the reception desk. James, she asked, her voice calm and direct. I'm Alina Grant. Thanks for coming in. Thank you for seeing me, I mumbled, my hands shoved into my pockets. She led me down a quiet hallway lined with white walls and a few abstract art pieces. The air was cool and sterile, completely different from the stale, anxious air of my apartment. We went into a small office, her desk neat and clutter-free. I read over the notes from your call, Alina said, gesturing to a chair opposite her desk. It's certainly unique. I have to be upfront, James. What you're describing defies conventional physics. However, the consistency of your observations, particularly about the moonlight, is intriguing. Most claims about anomalies are vague. Yours are quite specific. I know it sounds crazy, I said, my voice tight, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't happening. I appreciate your candor, she replied, a thoughtful expression on her face. My work focuses on interactions between light and consciousness, particularly how certain energy signatures might manifest under specific conditions. What you've described falls into territory we've only theorized about. She seemed skeptical, but she wasn't dismissing me. She was asterisk intrigued. That was enough for me. We talked for a while. She asked me about my background, any history of mental illness, recent stress, drug use, all the things I expected. I answered truthfully, explaining how I was an aerospace engineer, a pretty grounded person, not prone to fantasies. I told her about Robert, about how he thought it was stress or my mind playing tricks. Alina just nodded, listening intently. All right, James, she finally said, standing up. I'm willing to run some initial tests. We have a controlled, light-isolated chamber here. If what you're experiencing is real, we should be able to replicate parts of it under controlled conditions. A knot formed in my stomach. The idea of purposely exposing myself to the same conditions that made my shadow act up terrified me. But I knew it was the only way. I needed answers. I needed a solution. She led me to a large, windowless room. It was stark white, with equipment I didn't recognize. A single, large platform sat in the middle, and various light fixtures hung from the ceiling. A giant monitor covered one wall, showing a real-time feed from cameras positioned around the room. We'll start simple, Alina explained, gesturing to the platform. Just stand here. We'll cycle through various light sources. I stepped onto the platform, my arms hanging stiffly at my sides. The door hissed shut behind us, plunging the room into darkness for a moment before a soft, almost imperceptible light clicked on. Starting with UV, Alina's voice came from speakers on the wall. She was in a separate control room, watching the monitors. Nothing happened. My shadow, a faint outline, stayed perfectly still. I stood frozen, waiting, trying to feel any change, any shift. A few minutes later, the UV light clicked off, replaced by the normal, warm glow of a halogen lamp. My shadow appeared completely normal. A dark, motionless shape stretched innocently behind me. I let out a slow breath, part of me hoping that maybe, just maybe, it had all been a hallucination or a prolonged fit of stress. A small part of me wanted to be wrong. Now for the specialized light, Alina said, a faint hum filling the room as the halogen lamp faded. This light source mimics the exact wavelength and intensity of direct moonlight, specifically a full moon at zenith. similar to what you described on your hike. The room was bathed in a cold, silvery glow. It felt exactly like being under the full moon. My skin pricked with a strange tension. My shadow, already there, seemed to intensify, darkening, hardening at the edges. And then it happened. The shadow, without a single flicker, detached from my feet. It stretched, long and thin, across the polished floor, a silent, swirling entity under the silver light. It began to dance, a fluid, unnatural movement on the wall, completely independent of me. It wasn't mimicking me, it was performing its own strange, unsettling ballet. My stomach bottomed out. This was real. Even in a controlled environment, it was still happening. "It's detached," I whispered, my voice hoarse. My eyes were glued to the wall, watching the dark shape twist and writhe. "I see it, James," Alina's voice was calm, but I could hear a subtle shift in her tone, a hint of awe. "Recording everything. Incredible." The shadow suddenly stopped its dance. It contracted, shrinking in on itself for a second. Then, with a surprising burst of speed, it lunged. It didn't just snap back into place like it had on my balcony. It launched itself, a silent, black dart across the room, and melded onto my body with a sickening jolt. My whole body jerked. A violent, uncontrolled spasm twisted me to the side. My feet tangled, and I lost my balance, falling hard onto the unyielding floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me, a loud grunt escaping my lips as my head thudded against the ground. Pain exploded through my hip and elbow. I tried to push myself up, but my muscles felt heavy, unresponsive. My right arm, the one that had just been fighting me on the balcony, began to rise again. It lifted slowly, erratically, as if someone was guiding it with a rusty joystick. My wrist twisted inward, my fingers curling like claws. My head snapped to the left, my neck aching from the sudden, forced movement. I was still lying on the floor, helpless, as my own body betrayed me. The shadow had moments of control. It wasn't just influencing me, it was asterisk forcing me. "James, are you okay?" Alina's voice was sharp with concern, no longer just a scientist observing. She realized it. This was real, and it was escalating. I watched my own arm moving against my will, slowly rising toward the light. I had to stop it. I fought, clenching my fist, trying to force my arm down, but it resisted, trembling, still reaching for the light. It was fighting back, just like it had on my balcony. It was taking control, and I was terrified of what would happen next. "James, move away from the light source." Alina's voice cut through the speakers, sharp with urgency. "Try to get over to the wall in the corner." My arm twitched, my fingers splayed against my will, still pulling. My head jerked back, as if the shadow was trying to crane my neck to get a better look at the light. I struggled, digging my heels into the floor, pushing with my left arm, which still felt like my own. It was a slow, painful crawl across the polished floor, my body twisting, lurching, every movement a battle. The shadow thrummed, a silent vibration deep inside me, a constant defiant pull. It felt like my bones were trying to pop out of my skin. Reaching the wall felt like running a marathon. I managed to brace my back against the cool surface, pushing myself into the corner, away from the direct path of the mimicking moonlight. The moment the strongest part of the light stopped hitting me, the sensation eased just a little. My arm went slack, dropping to my side, though the lingering sense of unease, of something not quite right within my own skin, stayed. "Okay," Alina said, her voice calmer now, but still tight. "That was quite a demonstration. Are you hurt?" I pushed myself up, my hips screaming in protest from the fall. "Just my hip and elbow," I gasped, rubbing the sore spots. "And my arm, it feels like I pulled something." The door to the control room hissed open, and Alina walked in, her face serious. She stepped around me, looking at the floor where my body had been, then up at the light. She had a small tablet in her hand, her fingers flying across the screen. "The sensor readings were all over the place when it latched back onto you," she explained, not looking at me. "Massive energy spike. It's not just a visual anomaly, James. It's interacting with you on a physical level." "I know," I muttered, my voice raspy. "I felt it." She looked at me then, her sharp gaze taking in my trembling hands, my pale face. "We need to keep going, James. We need to understand this. You said you want answers. This is how we get them." I nodded, even though every bone in my body wanted to run, to bury myself under a pile of blankets, and pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't, not anymore. I'd seen it with my own eyes. This thing was a threat, and it was getting stronger. We worked through the night, the sterile white lab becoming our world. Alina brought in a strange array of equipment, most of it beyond anything I'd ever seen in aerospace engineering. There were transparent screens that glowed with shifting patterns, wires that snaked across the floor, and sensor pads she placed on the platform where I'd been standing. She started explaining what she was looking for, her voice methodical, a stark contrast to my internal panic. We observed its movement, of course, but what's more important is its energy signature. My theory is that it's a negative imprint of your own consciousness, like a dark mirror. And somehow, lunar radiation amplifies it. "A negative imprint?" I asked, trying to understand. "Think of it like this," she said, tapping on a screen that showed a complex diagram. "Your brain puts out electrical signals, right? Consciousness, thought, it's all electrochemical. What if, under very specific conditions, like the direct, intense moonlight you experienced, an inverse energy signature is created, a kind of anti-self that then feeds on your own mental state?" She explained that she had been tracking my neural pathways, the ones she had access to, as I sat on the shielded table under the custom light emitter. The large monitor on the wall, which I'd initially assumed was just for camera feeds, displayed intricate patterns of light and shadow, overlaid with glowing lines and numbers I didn't comprehend. Alina pointed to sections that lit up when the shadow moved, demonstrating how it was drawing on something from within me. The theory is that the moonlight acts as a catalyst, giving this negative imprint the necessary energy to manifest, to thicken. As you described it earlier, she continued, her eyes still on the data. And your fear, your exhaustion, the emotional and physical stress you're under, it's like fuel for it. "So it feeds on my fear?" I asked, a cold dread creeping in. That explained why it felt stronger after the balcony incident, why it felt so heavy in the lab. "Exactly," she confirmed, glancing at me. The more anxious, the more depleted you are, the more it has to work with. It's essentially a manifestation of your own shadow in the psychological sense, but given physical form by specific electromagnetic conditions. Disconnect its energy loop, and it loses its anchor to you. The concept was wild, surreal. My own fear was making this thing stronger, this thing that was trying to take me over. It was a vicious cycle. Alina showed me advanced imaging, glowing green and blue patterns that moved and pulsed on the giant monitor. I watched in horrified fascination as my shadow, a darker, denser shape than a normal shadow, seemed to drink in the surrounding light, its edges sharpening, almost vibrating. Even without the direct moonlight, it had a low, constant hum, a palpable presence. She talked about resonant frequencies and neural pathways, terms that, as an aerospace engineer, I could grasp on a theoretical level. But it still felt like something straight out of a science fiction movie. So, the goal is to disrupt its connection to your neural pathways, she concluded, turning to me. To sever its control, we need to break that energy loop. How? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She walked over to a strange piece of equipment in the corner of the room. It was a large metallic cylinder with a lens at one end and a collection of intricate dials and screens on the side. It was like a giant, futuristic flashlight. A focused, high-intensity light pulse, she said, her hand moving over the controls. Not UV. That would just make it react, like the specialized light we used a few hours ago. This device is designed to emit a specific frequency, a counter frequency that will overload and disperse the shadow's energy without harming you. I stared at the machine, then at her. You want to hit it with more light? I asked, my voice high. After what just happened, this is different, James, she insisted, her gaze steady. It's about frequency. Think of it like a sound frequency. If you hit a glass with its exact resonant frequency, it shatters right. This is the same principle. We're tuning the light to the shadow's specific energy signature, designed to destabilize it at its core. A knot formed in my gut. Idea of purposely exposing myself to this thing, to a powerful light beam, was terrifying. But the alternative was living like this, being slowly consumed by my own shadow, becoming a puppet in my own body. I had to do something. I had to get rid of it. I'll do it, I said, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. Let's do it. Alina nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips. Good. It's crucial we do this now. The longer it stays connected, the stronger it gets, and the more dangerous this becomes. As if on cue, a sudden sharp pain shot through my right leg. My knee buckled, and I stumbled, catching myself on a lab bench. The equipment on the bench rattled, a few small tools sliding off and clattering to the floor. What was that? Alina asked, her eyes widening. My leg was shaking, trembling, trying to move. It wasn't me. It was the shadow, sensing our plan. It was fighting back, actively resisting. A sharp, burning sensation spread up my leg, up my arm. My hand, which I'd rested on the bench, twisted. My fingers curled, not inward, but outward, grabbing at the metal, the small screws and tools digging into my palm. It knows, I choked out, my voice strained. It knows what we're trying to do. My head snapped back, a jolt going through my neck. My body was twisting, a violent, uncontrollable spasm. My arm lashed out, completely against my will. It was like a crude, flailing punch. My fist, clenched tight, smashed directly into a small, delicate-looking piece of lab equipment on the bench. There was a sickening crunch of glass and plastic, and the shattered pieces scattered across the floor, some of them digging into my hand. "James," Alina yelled, rushing toward me, her eyes wide with alarm. "Stop." I couldn't. My body was a battleground. My right arm, now twitching violently, swung back, grazing Alina's lab coat. It felt like my muscles were stretching, tearing. I could feel the sharp edge of a broken shard of glass in my palm, but I couldn't open my hand. The shadow was forcing my fingers closed, making me grit my teeth against the pain. I was helpless, my own body lashing out, a weapon against my will. Alina grabbed hold of my arm, trying to pull it down. She was strong, but the shadow's force, channeled through my own muscle, was far greater. My left arm, the one I still had some control over, instinctively went around her, pulling her close, trying to steady myself, trying to stop the movement. "I can't stop it," I grunted, pushing against her, trying to force my arm down. You have to get this ready." "I'm trying," she said, her voice tight with effort. She released my arm, stepping back quickly as my flailing body threatened to hit her again. Her eyes darted to the light device, then back to me, her breathing ragged. She moved quickly, expertly, towards the machine, her hands already flying over the dials, adjusting the calibration. But the shadow was relentless. My legs buckled even more, my body twisting, lurching, trying to stumble. A large metal stand, holding a bundle of wires, was too close. My legs swung out, kicking the stand with a loud clang. It wobbled, then tipped over, sending a cascade of wires and metal frames crashing to the floor, narrowly missing my foot. "I need to restrain your limbs," Alina said, not a question, but a directive, her voice firm. She glanced at the overturned equipment, then back at me, her expression grim. "The light device has to be calibrated perfectly, and I can't do that with you fighting." The stakes were higher than ever. The shadow was reacting with pure, raw aggression. It was a true battle now, not just a psychological struggle. I was losing control fast. Just hurry," I managed to pant out, my jaw clenched. My entire right side felt like it was locked in a tug-of-war. My arm kept snatching at empty air. My leg kept trying to kick. It was a struggle just to stay upright. Alina nodded, her attention already focused on the complicated dials of the light device. She worked with incredible speed, her fingers flying over the controls, making tiny adjustments. I could hear the faint whirring sound coming from inside the cylinder, a low hum that built in pitch, promising something powerful. I swayed, pushing against the lab bench with my left arm, trying to keep my body from lurching. The shadow twisted my neck again, forcing my head to snap back, and the burning sensation in my leg intensified. It felt like someone had set fire to my veins. "All right," Alina finally said, stepping away from the machine. She moved with purpose, her movements precise. "Lie down on the shielded table. We need to secure you." My body fought her every step of the way. When I tried to move toward the table, my legs tangled, trying to yank me in the opposite direction. It was like fighting myself in a dark room. Every step was a forced march, every instinct to comply met with an equal and opposite force from within. I stumbled, nearly tripping over the scattered wires from the Knocktober stand. "I can't," I choked out, a wave of frustrated despair washing over me. My vision blurred. Alina didn't waste time. She moved closer, grabbing my shoulders, guiding me, practically hauling me onto the large, padded table in the middle of the room. It was the same table I'd been on earlier when she was tracking my neural pathways. I felt the padded surface beneath me, cold and firm. The shadow thrummed, a frantic buzz in my bones, trying to pull me off the table, trying to make me thrash. "Hold still, James. Just for a second," she instructed, her voice calm despite the urgency. I lay there, my muscles spasming, my entire body rigid with resistance. My fingers clawed at the air, my legs kicked out wildly. I was screaming inside, a silent roar of protest against the betrayal of my own flesh. My teeth ground together so hard my jaw ached. Alina worked fast, her hands moving like lightning. She pulled out wide, thick straps from compartments built into the table. They were made of a sturdy, almost rubbery material, with heavy-duty buckles. She moved to my right arm first, the one that had been the most rebellious. I felt the strap wrap around my forearm, tight and unyielding. The shadow bucked, trying to rip my arm free, straining against the restraint. My muscles bulged, trembling with the effort. Alina leaned into it, pulling the strap even tighter, then pushed down on the buckle until it clicked into place with a definitive asterisk thunk. It held. My arm was pinned, immobile. Sharp, burning sting flared in my wrist where the strap dug in. Next, she went for my left arm, mirroring the process. It wasn't fighting as hard, but it still put up a stubborn resistance. I felt the strap pull tight, then the click of the buckle. My torso was next. A wider strap went across my chest, just below my shoulders, pinning me securely. The shadow pushed, trying to arch my back, trying to twist away, but the strap held firm, digging into my ribs. The air felt thin in my lungs. Finally, she moved to my legs. My knees buckled and my feet tried to thrash, but she quickly secured them one by one. The thick straps wrapped around my thighs and shins, practically fusing me to the table. I was completely immobilized, unable to move a single limb. The shadow was still there, a constant internal vibration, a desperate, frantic energy, but it couldn't force my body to move beyond a desperate, full-body tremor. My muscles burned, a constant, dull ache spread through my entire frame. I lay there, rigid, breathless, staring up at the ceiling, my eyes wide. My throat felt raw, as if I had actually been screaming out loud. Alina stepped back, looking at me, her expression a mix of exhaustion and grim determination. She ran a hand through her hair, pushing it back from her face. "Okay," she said, her voice a little breathless. "This is it, James." I just stared at her, unable to speak, my chest heaving. Every nerve ending felt alive, screaming in protest. The shadow felt like a live wire inside me, twitching and spasming. She walked back to the light device, her hands moving over the controls one last time, checking the settings. The low hum from the machine intensified, growing into a steady, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floor. She took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to me for a final confirmation. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage, my head still trying to jerk from side to side. My teeth were still clenched. "Activating the emitter," she announced, her voice clear and strong. I heard a soft click, then a brilliant, concentrated beam of light erupted from the lens of the machine. It wasn't the cold, silvery glow of the mimicking moonlight. This was something else entirely. It was a pure, intense white, almost blinding, and it pulsed, not in a rhythmic beat, but with a vibrant, almost chaotic energy. It shot directly onto my body, centering on my chest. The moment the light hit me, a shockwave seemed to pass through my entire being. It wasn't a physical impact, but a sensation of pure, agonizing vibration. The shadow, which had been a constant ache, suddenly flared. It intensified, becoming a swirling, churning vortex of pure darkness around me. I could see it, a dark mist rising from my skin, twisting and writhing in the brilliant beam of light. It looked like pure smoke, but it was solid, viscous somehow. It felt like living tar, clinging to me, fighting to stay. A guttural sound, deep and raw, tore from my throat. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something in me was being ripped away, peeled off, fiber by fiber. My back spontaneously arched, my entire body bowing off the table, straining against the straps that held me down. Every muscle screamed. Every bone felt like it was on the verge of snapping. The pain was immense, an indescribable agony that filled every corner of my awareness. My vision narrowed. All I could see was the swirling black mist and the relentless, searing white light. My jaw clenched tighter, grinding my teeth. The light beam continued, steady and unwavering. The shadow, the dark mist, writhed and churned, trying to hold on. I could feel its desperate struggle within me, a frantic, losing battle. And slowly, agonizingly, it began to dissipate. It wasn't a sudden burst, but a gradual erosion. Bits of the dark mist detached, dissolving into nothingness. The swirling vortex around me began to thin out, becoming transparent at the edges. I gasped for air, each breath a painful, ragged attempt. The pain intensified, reaching a crescendo. Then, just as suddenly, it began to recede. The thrashing of the shadow inside me lessened. The burning sensation in my limbs faded. The arch in my back straightened, slowly, until I was lying flat on the table again, held by the straps. The dark mist around me shrunk, contracting, shrinking, until it was nothing more than a faint wisp. Then, with a final, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through my entire body, it completely vanished. It was just gone. The light beam clicked off, plunging the room into relative darkness, broken only by the soft glow of Aliner's monitor. The sudden silence was absolute. I lay there, breathless, spent, utterly drained. My mouth was dry, my throat raw. My muscles ached, throbbed, every inch of my body screaming in protest. But the fight was over. The physical sensation of the shadow, the constant thrumming, the defiant pull, it was gone. An immense emptiness replaced it, a hollow space where the malevolent presence had been. It felt like a part of me had been scooped out, but it was a relief, a liberation despite the pain. I could move my fingers, my toes, within the tight confines of the straps. My own brain was directing the signals, not some unwelcome entity. Alina didn't move immediately. After a moment, I heard her quick, sharp intake of breath. She walked toward me, her footsteps a little unsteady. She deactivated the machine fully, then started unbuckling the straps, her hands trembling slightly. "James," she asked, her voice soft, tentative, a mix of relief and awe in her eyes. Are you okay?" I managed a weak nod. My voice was a rasp. It's gone." She reached out, gently touching my forehead, then my arm, as if checking to make sure I was truly there, truly free. I watched my own arm, my own fingers, flex at my command. The feeling was indescribable. The immediate threat was finally over. I was finally in full control of my own body. The ordeal was finished.